So this session is about GraphQL, React, Redux, Apollo, and our beloved Drupal. So to shortly introduce us, my name is Michael, or people call me Schnitzel. I'm the CTO of Amazee Labs. And with me we have Brandon, one of our developers from Amazee Labs Austin. Amazee Labs does a lot of different things. One of them is Drupal, and recently we also do quite some React. But actually, if we look a bit at the past, between 2013, when the whole idea of decoupled came up, we were actually a big opponent of it. Why? There were a lot of different reasons, and our lead developer in Zurich, Sebastian, or also called Fubi, he actually wrote a blog post, which you can see, which is not, yes. Okay, so he wrote a blog post about headless Drupal, the cake is a lie. And so how it comes, we never really implemented any decoupled sites because we saw a lot of issues. If you want to read his blog post, search for headless Drupal, the cake is a lie. Basically, it's about accessibility, performance, overhead that decoupled websites create. So in October 2016, we had a client in the Amazee Labs Zurich team that asked us, we would like to build 12 websites that look completely different from the front end, but they want to use all the same backend. Plus, there are going to be most probably 12 different teams that implement the different front ends. But again, they still want to use the same Drupal backend. So initially you think about, okay, And then you maybe go into a phase of like, what, like, why, and like, what the hell, how could we even do that? And yeah, then we started thinking, like, it has to be possible, but we really thought, like, we don't just want to create 12 different themes for the same Drupal site, because if we looked at the sites, they were so vastly different, and some of them worked completely different. So we had an idea. We had an idea to actually go back to the thing that we didn't like, the decoupled. Let's look at that again. Let's look what happened over the last 3 years. And we did that. And this morning, really this morning, I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning, we launched our first fully decoupled React website with GraphQL, Apollo, and Redux that talks to a Drupal 8 backend. So what does it do? So we have a Drupal on the backend. We have a React, Apollo, and Redux frontend. What all of them do, we will go a bit deeper into. And in between, we have a GraphQL API that allows the frontend, React, Apollo, Redux, talk to the backend in Drupal 8. So, how do we feel today? Actually pretty happy. It is right now, for us, the most exciting thing that's happening because we feel it is finally possible to do decoupled websites in a good way. And I'm going to show you, together with Brandon today, how we do that, what are the different components, how do they work. And yes, there are going to be quite some demos involved, and we really hope that the demo god is nice to us today, that it works. So the presentation is going to be about GraphQL. What is it? GraphQL in Drupal. Then we're going to talk about React as a front end. And then we want to see all together working, and we're going to do that. But let's first go into GraphQL. What is GraphQL even? So GraphQL has been introduced by Facebook, and they are actually using it in all your mobile apps. They're running with GraphQL since 2012. And they publicly published the schema, the idea, the specification behind it in 2015. And since then, it has been very fastly used by a lot of different people. So let's look at that. Who of you has seen the Star Wars API? Okay, so if you look at the Star Wars API, you have an endpoint, like here, we have people 1, and we get back, we get Luke Skywalker, and we get whatever, the colors, and we get the films. But then we realize, like now, if I want to see the films, I have to do another request. And maybe in there, there are all the directors, and I want to have the birth date of the directors. So let's say I want to show something which shows all the people plus their films. With regular REST, what that is, we will end up in running a lot of different requests. Or I could go to the person that actually implemented me that API endpoint and ask him, can you, instead of like showing the URL or the next endpoint, can you just please inject also the director's name? But then maybe Brandon wants to do something different, and so you end up in a lot of different APIs. So GraphQL fixes that. GraphQL comes per default with a really nice UI that is called GraphQL. And the idea is not only that you can write your queries in there, you can actually learn how your API works. There is no documentation that you have to read in order to understand how to query it. So how does it work? On the left side, I'm writing my query. On the right side, I have the output. And you're going to be a big fan of control space and comment space, because if I press control space, it shows me all the different fields I can request. So I can say, well, I want to have a person, and I want to define the person. So I just open a bracket and say, okay, person ID is 1. And I press Command Enter, and it gives me already an ID back. Well, that ID is maybe not the cool stuff, so I'm saying, what can I get of that person? So it now shows me all the fields inside that person. And I can say name, and I press Enter, and I have Luke Skywalker. Not very fancy so far. Everything we can do via REST API. But now, let's look at that. So in there, I'm not only having fields, but I'm also having relationships to other objects. There is a film connection relationship. So I can add film collect and add, and now it auto-completes me. Like you have to add some edges and some nodes, but GraphQL does it automatically. And I can see now, if I control space here, now it shows me everything that is possible about films. And I can show the title, or I can say, show me the director. And now in here, on the right side, I have the person, Luke Skywalker, with their films, the title and the director. So the idea behind GraphQL is that you're not just consuming API endpoints, you're actually telling the API what you want and how it should be outputted. If, for example, my app expects the director to be, let's say, something else, I can just add another name for that, and now I'm getting back blah instead of the director. So I can define to the endpoint what I really want. And the best is I can do multiple queries at the same time. So right now I'm requesting the person and I'm requesting the films in there. But I can just go down here and I can do another one. And I can say, by the way, and I would like to have all species as well. So, and of these species, please show me the language they're talking. So on top, I still have my request. But at the bottom, at the same time, with one single API request, I'm also getting all the species with all their languages. So basically the idea is you give the power to the person that actually needs the data. You're just exposing an API, and the person that uses it can define what they need, what they use, how they use it. So let's go back here. So GraphQL gives you exactly what you need. You can run multiple resources at once. You can query multiple things at once. And what I showed you, it actually goes much further. You have fragments, you can inject variables that you can reuse. There's a lot of other things. And the very interesting part is any schema is possible. So all the fields we requested now, the person that writes the GraphQL API can define them completely your own. You can create everything what you want there. The next interesting part is we can not only request stuff, we can also create stuff. We can change stuff. You have full mutation support. And the very interesting part of it as well, there is no version of a GraphQL API. Because if you're adding another field, you just add it, and the person that is going to use it with their API can just request it. And GraphQL is based on a very strongly typed system. If we actually go here and click on the right side on the documentations, we can see all the different queries we have. And if we go into a person, we can see that's type person, and we have different types. But we also have like the regular types, but we also have a planet type. So who can tell me a CMS that is strongly typed? Drupal 8. The entity API is fully typed. You have very strong types. You know exactly what is. So GraphQL makes a lot of sense to run inside Drupal, because we already do these things. We already have relationships between objects. We call them entity references. You already have objects with fields. We see them again in GraphQL. So we said, let's combine them. Let's try it, and it works. So we've built, or the community built, we were part of it, a Drupal GraphQL module that gives you full GraphQL support. And because I said I want to actually see how somebody does, I told Brandon roughly 48 hours ago or 24 hours ago, you should try it. And he did. And he will show us now what he learned over using GraphQL in the roughly last 24 hours.
Thank you. So well, yeah, he gave me, we have a talk to do, you need to do some things. So I've been using it for less than 24 hours. These are all the mistakes I made, AKA noob tips for you guys. If you are interested in this stuff and you want to turn around and start using GraphQL in the next hour or so, this should help you out. First of all, the GraphQL module for Drupal, you should use Composer to install it. Both branches require external PHP libraries, so just use Composer, save yourself some trouble. The second thing is, which version should you use? There's a 2x branch and a 3x branch. If you like all of the things that are said on the project's description page, use 2x. It includes all of the default schema that will let you get all of the data out of Drupal and query all that stuff, but it's the old version. So if you want to experiment with GraphQL with a Drupal site that has data already and kind of see what queries can I run to get the data I want, the 2x branch is the best for that. However, if you want to start building this for a production site, or you think this is going to go live, I would suggest using the 3x branch. It's the new stuff. It's been re-architected, has a much better object-oriented style, much easier to extend your own schema, and coming in May, it will have full Drupal schema support, just like the 2x branch. So if you waited just a little bit longer, you'll have everything that 2x has, but it's a much better developer experience, much more maintainable. So usage basics. This may seem obvious at first, but you should learn GraphQL first before you start using GraphQL with Drupal. If you think that you're going to install GraphQL and that gives you everything you need to know to start writing queries, that's not exactly correct. But the syntax is simple, the concepts are simple. Just go to the graphql.org/learn. You'll get all the basic concepts, and that will give you all the necessary information you need to then start using the GraphQL UI, which Michael showed you in the demo. The good news is this comes with both versions of the GraphQL module. So if you install GraphQL module in Drupal, you will get the graphical user interface, and with your basic understanding of queries, you can use the autocomplete that the GraphQL module gives you to start auto-completing all of your Drupal stuff. And that is a much better way to learn exactly how GraphQL module in Drupal works and what schema it provides. So I have some examples. If you use the 2x branch, this is the schema that the GraphQL module provides. So one example is you can run node query type searches. So on the left, I'm saying, give me all nodes with the title test article, return the node ID, the status, the rendered output, and the user ID. And on the right-hand side, it gives me all that information. And that's just built in. You install the module, you go to /graphical/explore, and you get your data. And you can start querying that immediately. For the 3x branch, it's much less out-of-the-box friendly. The only things that are really easy to do is you can query an entity by ID, and then you can get the ID back. And that's it. So if you want more data than that from the 3x branch, you do have to actually write some code. Fortunately, like I said, it's being re-architected, much better object-oriented programming style. It's actually not that bad. There's a class for your schema, there's a class for your fields, and there's a class for your types. You write a little bit of glue code, you extend all the base classes from GraphQL, and all your autocomplete stuff starts working in the graphical, and everything works well. So my advice is, in the 3x branch for GraphQL module, there is an example module. It has, if you also enable that, you will get a lot more data out of your Drupal database by default, but it like replaces everything. So you wouldn't want to use that example module in production. You would just use it as an example for writing your own module. There's also a module in the Drupal decoupled app, which Michael will demo a little bit later, called GraphQL_demo. It also has a lot more code to kind of tell you or give you an example of how you should write your own stuff. So for the 3x branch, it's much nicer that you get this kind of base schema that the GraphQL module gives you, but in your custom module, you can extend the schema with anything you want. So that gives you, you can start writing your own custom GraphQL modules and stuff. So I started writing the GraphQL backend for the Texas Camp website, which is built in React, and we already had a Drupal site with backend data in it. So this is the structure it kind of looks like. You first define the root query field, which here is section by name. That will return a type, which I have the section type. And on the section type, you define what fields are available. And I said I want to return a body, an image, and a title. So it's really just 3 classes, a little schema glue, and you've got data being returned out of your GraphQL API. And so in just a couple hours, after figuring out a few things, which hopefully you now don't have to also, I had a totally functioning GraphQL app. In like 30 minutes, I plugged in the Apollo stuff with React, and I had React querying and getting data from Drupal. And it's all up and running, and I have a fully functional Drupal, GraphQL, and React app. It's very easy.
Cool, thank you. Okay, you might wonder, like, okay, it looks or it sounds like not fully done yet, things. Well, we actually use it in production. So the site that you might be already queried is running that behind. And yes, we will write a default schema for it. So the idea is that when you download the GraphQL module, there is a schema in there that you can enable. It's going to be opinionated by us. So based on like how the routes are called and things like that, that's based on that. If you don't like that, or if you need a subset of it, you can take it and you can disable parts of it. But the idea is really that you can install a GraphQL module on the Drupal site and everything can be requested. And I'm talking about everything. We're not only talking about content entities, we're also talking about config entities. So everything that is within Drupal that is somehow accessible, we will be able to do through GraphQL. Another thing is also we have full Drupal cache and cache tag support. So everything that you load, even though you go very deeply, is using itself the Drupal caching in the cache interface with the cache tags. So if you make GraphQL requests with the Drupal module, you see a huge amount of cache tags in there. You can use them and stuff like that. And we're also already supporting mutations. So you can create entities via GraphQL. So basically you can do whatever you want directly via GraphQL. So let's now move from the backend and the GraphQL in between. Let's move to the front end. As I mentioned, we're using React, Apollo, and Redux. So React is probably the thing that you already know. That's the front-end library, again, by Facebook, that is quite widely used right now. Plus, there is Apollo. Apollo is a project of the GraphQL community, and Apollo basically provides a very broad set of tools that you can use GraphQL in almost every language. So there's a GraphQL for React, there's a GraphQL just for regular JavaScript, there's a GraphQL for Python, for PHP, things like that. So how do I communicate with a GraphQL endpoint? There's a GraphQL server implementation as well, if you want to write your own GraphQL and all these things. Go to the Apollo website, you will see there, and we're using the GraphQL client for React, that React can actually talk to the Drupal. And then for the people that already have used React, Apollo uses Redux. Redux is a state container which allows you to have different states of your React app, so you can jump back and forward and you know exactly what happened. It makes it much easier for debugging what exactly happens, but also for performance things. So if we go back to 2013, 2016, I said Amazee Labs was a big opponent of React, or decoupled in general. And one of the big problems that we saw was SEO and accessibility. Why? Well, if you have a decoupled app, and if you had one in the past, all that was sent to the browser was an HTML structure with 10 lines of code, with maybe one JavaScript file in there that then loaded all the stuff. And now please show that to a crawler that cannot run JavaScript, or show that to a screen reader that cannot show run JavaScript. So what happens is all these things cannot load it. So you had problems in SEO, you had huge problems with accessibility. Comes in isomorphic JavaScript. So the idea behind isomorphic is your browser requests the first page, and that request goes to a Node.js server. And that Node.js server has the code that you run in the browser also running locally. So the server pre-renders everything for you inside the Node.js. So it makes like API requests to the Drupal and stuff like that. And then it sends everything rendered, the whole HTML with all the CSS, like it would not be a JavaScript app. It sends it to the browser, and the browser displays it. So that means a crawler or something that cannot run JavaScript can display it, no problem, there's no JavaScript. Then there is a tiny little piece of JavaScript in that response, in that HTML. And what happens, the browser will execute that JavaScript, and the JavaScript will slowly take over the whole site. So every link gets replaced by React links and things like that. So it morphs into a full React app. And after that, every additional requests go to the API directly. You're not talking to the Node server anymore, and the React app queries GraphQL directly and renders that. Sounds complicated? It's actually not, but let's look at it. So we go to our website that we just launched today. It's www.gomio.ch. It's about food. It's German, but it will be translated to French soon. But we also will have other languages. So if I visit the website the very first time, and actually let me disable JavaScript, because that's the best. So I'm disabling JavaScript in my browser right now, and I'm refreshing the page, and you can see that the whole page is loaded. So everything is there that you would expect from a regular website, and I can also click these things, and it will load me another URL, still with JavaScript completely disabled. So what actually happens is on www.gomio.ch is the Node.js server running, and every request that goes in is pre-rendered and sent back to the browser. Now I enable JavaScript again, and what we can actually see, if we go to the network tab and visit the site, the page is loaded already, and we do some additional GraphQL requests already to make sure that that is. But if we go, if I now, let's say, click on one of the articles, and we look here in GraphQL, it only makes 2 GraphQL requests. The first one is actually a course check, because we have different domains, so you don't have to worry about that. But the actual request happens in here. So we have a GraphQL request that tells the backend what we actually want, and in the front end we have all the things, the whole object, everything given. React gets that and will render that. And if I click now around, if I go back to the start page, if I go back in there, you can see how fast it is. And the reason is GraphQL, or the React, is actually caching all the requests. So Redux comes into play and helps us caching all these things. So the site is super fast after you have it done once on your site, and you can see there are not even any more GraphQL requests anymore. So if I'm on the site and go back to the start page, there's no single GraphQL request, because the React app already has that cached and will use it. So the first request is completely non-HTML and no JavaScript. JavaScript will render, will morph into a full React app, and after that you have one. If your browser does not support JavaScript, it's never executed, and the whole behavior is still the same. So the site can be crawled, it's accessibility-wise, it can be read by screen readers and stuff like that. So that was for us the first step that we really said, okay, now it gets interesting. Now we feel we can do decoupled apps because the problems of SEO and accessibility are addressed. The next problem, though, that a lot of people said, and quite frankly correct, was performance. If you use a regular REST API to load stuff, you will have a lot of different requests to the backend. If we look at that site, we have a menu with a flyout menu, with a header, we have multiple articles, we have a footer down here, we have inject. So usually these things are all separate endpoints, and you would request them one by one via REST. So we could end up in having 10 to 15 different requests, which just takes very long. As we learned, though, with GraphQL, we can do multiple requests in a single one. So React, Apollo, and Redux together keep an internal cache of everything that already has been loaded. And because GraphQL can request multiple resources in one single request, together they will figure out what do I still need and what do I not need. So let's look at that. So we see here on the website, we have a footer here. And the footer is actually injected by Drupal. So the React has no idea what exactly is in that footer in there. And we have another site that, or another page that has a map. So the map allows you to filter, you can, oops, sorry. The map, you can filter for it, you can scroll through it. One of the things we will see, if now my site loads, the map does not have a footer. So right now, I'm visiting the whole site without never loading the footer. Because there is none. Like that design decides there is no footer there. So if we now look at the inspector and see the network tab, and we filter for GraphQL again, now I go to the start page. The start page has a footer. So what happens, and the start page obviously has also a lot of code about the start page itself. So React will realize that the footer is missing and will also load the footer. It will not, though, create a separate request for the footer. It will request 2 resources at once the start page and the footer together. So I click here, and you can see GraphQL loaded things. And now we see in here, we actually have within one GraphQL request, we have 2 replies. One of them is the start page. The other one is the footer here. So we see the footer primary menu. We see all the links in there. Where do they link? Things like that. All things given by Drupal. And now, let's say I'm visiting one of these articles. And now the footer is already loaded. So I click on that. And now I can see the GraphQL response for that one does not have the footer anymore in there. It's just some social feed stuff. So that gives me the opportunity to really only load the things that I really need. And if I need a lot of stuff, I can put all of them in one single request, send them over. Drupal can generate all that stuff and send it back, and you have only one single request that really happens. So that was for us, that really took the decision that we said, okay, we want to try it, or we want to go forward, we want to use it, because the major two things, SEO and accessibility plus performance, were fixed for us. Interestingly, after we started to implement and do some stuff, we realized, hey, we need to run Node.js now. So you not only like put some JavaScript files on Drupal and let Drupal output that, you actually need a Node server running in your hosting environment. So how did we do that? Like that. So the top part is Drupal. It's, as I said, there are multiple front ends, and there's one single Drupal site in there. The Drupal itself, and there is a GraphQL Drupal module in there. So that's one, and that's going to be the same. At the bottom, these orange things, that's each of the sites. As I mentioned, they are completely separate. So they are completely separate React apps that all talk via the same GraphQL API to the same Drupal. Of course, they share some libraries, and we do some via NPM or Yarn. We share libraries that we've built, but at the end, they're all separate. So what happens is the browser at the front will make a single request to the node. And as we learned before, the node has to render that because the browser never visited the site. So the browser makes a request and ends up on our Docker hosting stack. So the Node.js is all hosted in Docker. And in there is a Node.js Express server with the React, everything running. So that's the isomorphic part. And what that thing will do, it will actually make a GraphQL request to the Drupal. So that's the pre-rendering part. And after that is pre-rendered, it's sent back to the browser. You can see in there we have multiple CDNs, and all these requests, they're all cached. So if the star page is cached, is also cached in a CDN. So if somebody already visited that, you're not even landing here. You go directly to the CDN, and it sends you the whole page back, already cached, and then the isomorphic happens. We are also caching the GraphQL requests, because the GraphQL requests are very similar. They have one URL and a lot of data in them, so we cache them as well. There's a CDN in there as well that caches it. And now the fun part comes, if the browser can execute JavaScript and does isomorphic things and isomorphs itself in a full React, it actually makes now GraphQL requests directly to the Drupal. The node part is completely ignored from that point on because it's not necessary anymore. It runs in your browser now. But it goes still through the same CDN requests that the node itself also goes through. Now you might say, well, that's a lot of CDN. Yes, it is. And the actually very interesting part is we have multiple cache layers in there. So we're using cache tags to invalidate. So the Drupal here sends cache tags back through GraphQL requests, and the node itself will take these cache tags, add some more to them, and send it back to the browser, so the CDN that is in between will also cache them. And if now like a node changes, Drupal actually connects to all these CDNs and tells them, hey, please remove that cache tag and remove that cache tag. And at the same time, all of the requests are fully invalidated, and the next person that goes in will request it. The images itself, they're completely bypassed by Node. They're generated by Drupal. They're cached as well. No big deal there. And if we now actually have multiple sites, so let's say that is our Gumio, and we will launch 11 others, we will just create, just the front end will be replicated. So the front end can look completely different. And then we actually do the same fun here as well. If you have more questions about that, and if you want to actually see, I could talk 2 hours about that. Come and see me later, and I can show you how exactly it works. But with that, we have a really fast website that is completely cached and allows us to run Node and Drupal in parallel without needing to worry like clearing too much things and stuff like that. Okay, so now we only talked about GraphQL, and we talked about React, and Apollo, and Redux, and we talked about Drupal. Wouldn't it be cool to actually see everything running together? So everything you need, you will find on that GitHub URL. I will tweet it later on. Fubi, he is the guy that actually wrote the blog post that the cake is a lie. He is one of our lead developers, and he published that whole app. And if you actually want to look at that thingy, let's go there. So it is a full Drupal with GraphQL in there, and it's also a full React, Redux, and Apollo app. So we see here there is a backend and a frontend, and inside the frontend we actually have in package.json, you can see that we are loading React, React Apollo, we are loading Redux, and all these things. There is a README that explains to you what to do. You clone it, you run composer install, you run yarn install, or if you still want to use npm, that also works. And then the whole thing is actually hosted on the Amazee.io local development environment. So you start the Docker containers, you install the site, and you enable the GraphQL module. And that here is the GraphQL demo module that Brandon before talked about, that does some of the things that are currently missing in the GraphQL. So if you want to see how that works, go in there. And then we run our front end. So let's do that. I've already done it. So we're a bit faster here. So that is my decoupled backend running on the Amazee Docker environment. And in here, I created an article that is called Hello DrupalCon. We can see it's node 1, and in there, I've written hello in there. And you can see that's a regular Drupal. There's nothing else. That's just the whole thing. And now, if I open the front end, so the front end is running inside the Node.js Express server that is listening to port 3000. I started that with just yarn start, so that automatically boots everything. And if I now go to that URL, localhost 3000 node/1, so the React will actually see that the URL is a path that tells me which node should be loaded. And if I go here, I can see it tells me hello DrupalCon. It gives me back hello. And if we actually look at the code here, we can see there's no server-side rendering enabled right now. So it is completely, that's the 10 lines of code I talked before about. So it just sends you back the React. The whole React is booted. The React actually then queries Drupal. We're using Apollo. Apollo has an awesome Chrome extension that you can see the actual queries. So I can click on there and I can see that it requests Drupal with a variable node/1. And here is the whole query string. So this already does some fragments, and it's a bit extended things of GraphQL, what is possible. But you can see that all these requests, and there is actually also a GraphQL inside of that thing. So I can click here, and I can see the request that happens to the GraphQL of Drupal, and also the return. And that is just rendered inside React, regular React components, nothing special there. And if I now, let's say, add another content, hello React with Drupal, hello. And I publish that, I go back to my nodes too, and I have that as well. And because it's fun, and because we usually like to have node overviews, there is also an overview here. If I refresh that here, I can see there's an article overview that renders me the article. I can click on it. If we want to look at that query here, we can see that it's an article overview query, and it does also GraphQL. So you can take that thing, download it, and start it, and you can play around. You can learn React in it, you can learn Apollo in it, you can learn Drupal in it, you can learn GraphQL in it. It really should be here for anybody that is interested in using it to get a very fast start. Well, we already did that. Okay. So overall, if we look back of what we have done in the last 6 months, it was a very high initial investment. And to be honest, there were also multiple doubts while we were on it if it was the right decision, because we had to build a GraphQL module, we had to learn everything about React, we had to do a lot of different things. But we are, as a company, we're committed to open source everything that we've done for that. So you will find things on Fubi's GitHub, you will find stuff on ours, we will write blog posts about it, we're going to continue also talk about. We really believe that is one possible future, how in the future Drupal can work with decoupled. We don't say that every Drupal site needs to be decoupled, but there are some cases where it makes a lot of sense. And right now, it's very complicated to do that because you have to learn a lot of things. That's why we have like these decoupled starting packages for you to start and play around with it. The developers are obviously very happy because they can now use decoupled frontends. The client is very happy because he's not going to pay a lot of money for just a lot of different Drupal sites. We just have to implement the frontends. And overall, I feel we're very excited about the future. So that's it.